Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Jacqueline Daly. I'm Chair of this Housing and Homelessness Policy and Accountability Committee. Before we begin, there are a couple of housekeeping points to cover. This meeting is, as ever, being live streamed on YouTube. So by taking part, you are consenting to being recorded. If the fire alarm sounds either continuously or intermittently, I will adjourn the meeting. Please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion by the staff fire exit, which is behind me to the right. Security officers here will direct us all to the assembly point in Riverside Gardens. There are tea, coffee and biscuits available in the kitchen next to reception, and the toilets are on my left-hand side. I always feel like I should be crewing an aircraft at this point. Officers, please introduce yourself before speaking for the first time, and if we can remember to try and turn the microphones on before we speak and off when we finish, and be less sort of finger pointing and shaking. So proceeding to the agenda. First of all, apologies for absence, and apologies for absence have been received from Councillors Sally Taylor and Omid Miri. Do members have any declarations of interest?
No.
On to the minutes. Do members agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of November 2024 as an accurate record?
Yes. Agreed.
Lovely. Which takes us really swiftly on to our first major item, 25-26 revenue budget and medium-term financial strategy. Could I please invite Councillor Rowan Ree to give us an overview of the 25-26 revenue budget, and Sukhvinder Khalsi is here to supplement, I believe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair and Committee, for allowing me to come here today to talk a little bit about the revenue budget for 2025-26. So I'm going to do a sort of a pretty quick overview of the budget as a whole this evening, and then I'm going to hand over to Francis and the officers to talk through the housing elements that I'm sure you'll be particularly interested in this evening. So just to kick off, we start with just a general overview slide. We have a net general fund revenue budget this year of £221 million. Revenue funding, as you'll have heard me moaning about for the last few years now, is down 54% on where it was in 2010. It's also down in cash terms. Back in 2010, we had a grant of £164 million from central government. We're now down to just 132. There aren't many organisations in the country that would be able to provide the same services they were providing 15 years ago, with 54% less resources than they had before. But that's what we're doing. We're not only providing the same services, but we're going further. We're providing a whole range of other services that residents value. Things like free home care, things like free breakfasts for primary school children, things like our local law enforcement teams, and things like our comprehensive council tax support scheme. Now, managing a local government budget is tough at the best of times. It's been very difficult with these cuts, but also because we face changing demographics, and we've had over a decade now of a sluggish national economy. The changing demographics mean that we have more and more people who are getting to an age where they rely on council services, and the sort of general downturn in the economy means that more people also rely on council services for support, where they're not able to make ends meet themselves. That said, there has been some positive news that we got from this year's budget. The slides give a summary of some of the additional funding that the government provided in October. So Hammersmith and Fulham will get a share of some of these things, like the Housing Support Fund, which was extended for the seventh time. It was intended to be closed earlier last year, but the new government extended it. An extra £1 billion of SEND service provision, homelessness prevention grants of £233 million. And £500 million for road maintenance. Now, all these things go some way towards helping to plug the gap, but they do still leave us quite a long way behind where we were 15 years ago. In terms of the objectives of what we're trying to achieve with this budget, our first priority, and I think the first priority of every area of government, should be to ensure the safety of local residents, to keep people safe. That's why we're elected, and that's what we're going to do. This budget goes a long way towards doing that. We also need to protect the statutory services, those things that we're obliged to provide by central government, as well as those unique services I mentioned earlier to Hammersmith and Fulham that residents value so much. We want to boost economic growth within the borough. I know that's a bit of a buzzword at the moment at all levels of government, but it's something that we're particularly keen to do and have very real plans that are in train at the moment to attract investment and jobs to the area. We want to make sure that the council itself is run as efficiently as possible. It's innovative, that it's well governed, and it's able to withstand shocks in the future. And last but certainly not least, we're very proud of our position as having the third lowest council tax in the country, and preserving low tax rates is something that we are very keen to do, and something I'm very glad that we've been able to do this year. So if I move on to the headlines of the budget, this is a budget that sets out to fund the fight against crime and antisocial behaviour here in Hammersmith and Fulham. We've got £3.5 million of extra investment in crime and antisocial behaviour prevention. That's investment in our law enforcement team, our innovative gangs unit, in prevention of violence against women and girls. But also, as somebody once said, it's not just about being tough on crime, but tough on the causes of crime as well. And so that's why we're spending money on our school attendance strategy and helping residents identify fraud, the fastest growing crime in the country. I mentioned earlier the demographic factors and the impact of a slow economy on council services. And something that we're seeing, something that councils across the country are seeing, is a real strain on the statutory services that councils are obliged to fund by central government. These are things that, they're not sort of nice to haves. They're not areas where we can choose whether or not we provide a service to an individual. Where these problems are identified, we have an obligation to act. So something we're going to cover this evening, homelessness. Under the Homelessness Act, we've got obligations to meet when people present themselves as homeless to the council. Now, we have a choice here. We can either choose to put extra money into funding them, or they'll have to provide the services anyway and find money from elsewhere throughout the year. We've taken the prudent approach of allocating extra resources to adult social care, to children's services, to homelessness, and to waste collection, something I know that people in the borough feel particularly strongly about. We also have additional spending on upstream. I mentioned promoting prosperity earlier. Upstream is the next stage in the council's industrial strategy, allocating £250,000 towards that to help that get off the ground, and to make sure that it has the resources that it needs to really help the new businesses who are coming into the area or looking to start in the area, and to make sure that everybody in the borough benefits from the additional growth that this is creating. We're investing in the fight against climate change, one of the biggest dangers facing not just our borough, but our country and our planet. And we're investing in the sports facilities that our residents use and enjoy so much, although presumably not on nights like tonight. We've got a bit of a snapshot there of the budget. 2% pay inflation, 2.7% price inflation. Obviously, inflation has been pretty wild in the last few years. We're not at the 11.1% rates that we had under the last government, but we do need to make provision for inflation so that as prices increase, the council is able to continue paying our bills. You'll see here this budget provides £12.3 million of extra investment in council services. We'll cover that investment in a bit more detail, but those are the things that I've just mentioned in the previous slide. So £12.3 million of additional spending. And then you'll see here the increase in our council tax base, the £5.1 million of efficiencies that we found throughout the year, improvements to our collection funds, and the increase that I spoke about in government grants. So these are the investment proposals. I won't go through all of them, but one I'm sure that we're going to be speaking about this evening is this £1.2 million for housing solutions. I mentioned the importance of funding our statutory services. You'll see £2.2 million for children's services, £2.8 million for adult services, an additional £1.8 million for our waste service, and then £3.4 million for our law enforcement team, gangs unit, and preventing violence against women and girls. In terms of savings, we've managed to find £5.1 million of efficiencies throughout the year, whether that's in children's services by better strengthening our care leavers provisions, so that prevention is better than cure in this sense. By preventing family breakdown, you save costs further down the line. By finding, we found in adult services £0.7 million of efficiencies. And then if you go to police department, which is looking at our public realm, we've managed to find £1.7 million of savings there. So across the council, we've got a number of corporate redesigns and transformation programs, and that's added £0.8 million to our savings this year, but will continue to save money in the future. If you turn to council tax, as I mentioned earlier, we're very proud of our record on council tax, the third lowest council tax in the country. A Band D property in 24-25 would pay £915 a year, one of a very small number of councils where that's under £1,000 a year. The changes in council tax this year would amount to an additional 88 pence per week. But I think who pays tax is just as important as how much tax people pay. And that's why I was really proud to be able to present our council tax support scheme at full council last week, which provides a discount for 4 in 10 households. And we're one of just 3 councils across London where the most vulnerable residents pay nothing at all. It's really important, a principle of this, that those least able to pay the least, and that's something that we'll be sticking with as the administration continues. There's some general information next about service allocations, where money is going in terms of the various council departments, where the savings have come from, and then those important inflation numbers as well, which gives a total change within the departmental spending. Obviously, there are a number of risks that the council needs to be aware of. Some of the ones that we've picked out and that we need to be particularly vigilant about. Things like reform to local authority funding. I mentioned the burdens that legislation places from central government places on local government. We will be keeping an eye out for any other areas where the council needs to take action. The demographic change, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be continuing to monitor those. And then large projects like the civic campus. Finally, well, not quite finally, but if we move on to our reserves, I think we've been in a pretty good position in the last few years. So despite the difficult situation that local government has been facing, in the last 2 years, we've actually managed to add to our general reserve balances by running budget surpluses over the last 2 years. So we now have £21.6 million of general balance reserves. This is what I like to think of as our sort of rainy day funds. This is, should something go drastically wrong, it's useful for us to have money that we can dip into. By proposing a balanced budget, we're not proposing to tap into this. We also have the earmarked reserves, £73.5 million. Now these are really for smoothing spending, large areas of spending over a number of years. So if we were to know that in 3 years' time we needed to spend an extra £1 million on a new computer system, say, rather than having to wait and find that £1 million within the year, we can put aside a little bit every year, so that when the time comes, we know that we've got the money available. So those are our earmarked reserves. They're earmarked for specific purposes, and you can see the change in those over the coming years. If we look to the future, we have our medium-term forecasts. Every year it's a challenge to balance the budget, but it's one that we've risen to every year. And that's because of the excellent work of my fellow cabinet members and council officers, whether in the finance department led by Sukhvinder, or across the council. Richard and Danny in the housing department have done a fantastic job of grappling with the issues that they're facing, as have officers across the whole of the council. This only works because everybody is pulling in the same direction. Everyone is trying to be as ruthlessly financially efficient as possible, and everyone is focusing on delivering the best quality services to residents. Okay, and then if you go to the next steps, I'm doing my my tour of the PACs this week and next. I always enjoy starting off with housing, because it's my favourite, but I'll be going to all of the others as well. We'll then be taking the budget to Cabinet on the 10th of February, and the Council will vote on the budget on the 26th. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ree. Councillor Uma, would you like to add anything here? Okay, lovely. May I ask, Sukhinder, was there anything you wanted to add, or may I ask a question?
Chair, next question.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ree, I am frequently asked by residents how, and particularly at the moment, if you look at, say, Havering, Croydon, Newham, Lambeth, all having conversations with the government about emergency funding. Here we have the third lowest council tax, and we're one of the, I think I understand, one of the few boroughs left to actually being able to protect their support scheme. I think quite a few boroughs have had to sort of eat away at that, and so what I get asked from residents quite a bit when we're talking about this is, how does Hammersmith and Fulham do it? How do we keep, with a low tax, a good support scheme, and have money to spend on things like adult social care?
Thank you very much. It's a very good question. I think when people look at Hammersmith and Fulham, they think of a leafy, wealthy West London borough. Whereas actually those of us who live here know that while we might have some of the highest land prices in the country, also there are huge areas of deprivation within the borough. Right? Council tax is a hugely regressive tax. It doesn't take any account of your income or your ability to pay. A Band H property, which in theory which pays 3 times as much as a Band A property, will be worth at a minimum 8 times as much. So it's not really a particularly fair tax in terms of how it's put together. And so my view is that the fairest thing we can do in these situations is to try and keep the tax as low as possible, right? So that those people who have been struggling over the last few years pay as little as possible. And I think that's where both keeping the taxes low, but also keeping our comprehensive council tax support scheme is so important. Right? I think so many councils across the country have made changes to it. I know in some places the maximum discount is just 15%, whereas we have a maximum discount of 100%. Right? Those who are most vulnerable pay nothing at all, and I think that's a really important principle, and I think one that we really want to stick to. The way that we do it is through being ruthlessly financially efficient. It's not just a slogan; it's something that runs through the council. Every cabinet member, every council officer is focused on the outcomes for residents and trying to get those as efficiently as possible. We're focused you've got a laser-like focus on delivery, making sure that what comes out of the council is as efficient but also as effective as possible. And that's something that we're going to continue focusing on in the years to come. You've seen with the medium-term financial strategy, things aren't going to get easier, but because we've got this approach, because we've got this in our DNA, it's a challenge we feel we'll also rise to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members?
Yeah.
Councillor Alford.
Firstly, as I have said publicly, and I will say again tonight, it would actually help, rather than just having to look at screenshots, to actually have printed papers, because I have to keep on writing notes while you're speaking. So that is one point I would like to make. It is not a very good way of scrutinising if you were having to dash backwards to the screen, write something down, when in advance I could have prepared some questions. So I would make that point to be borne in mind. To continue, in the papers, you quote 3.4 million for community safety and social inclusion. In that paper, you quoted 3.5, and then it went back to 3.4. Can you give me some understanding whether it's 3.5, 3.4?
I certainly can. First, in terms of the budget papers, you are sent the full papers. This is a summary of those. If you'd taken the time to read those,
I haven't read everything.
Then the answers would all be in there.
Well, not between the 3 and the 4, because
yes, it would actually. If you'd stop interrupting and let me answer the question. The 3.5 rolls in the money for the digital inclusion program, which is to tackle fraud. Now, that's not in the 3.4 million, which is just for the crime and antisocial behaviour prevention. As I mentioned at the presentation, that's prevention of crime, but also the causes of crime. So they're two slightly different things.
I think it would have been easier if you had put them in budgetary, the 3.4, and then you...
It's all in the paper. If you'd read it, it's all in the paper.
I have read it.
Well, it doesn't sound like it.
Thank you, Councillor Reid, for that. I don't have any more questions on this one.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Sadiq.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to say is a really balanced budget proposal, and where we can see there is efficiencies 5.1 and further investments 12.3 across and there is no cut in the services, essential services. Can I ask this magic? Can you explain to the residents? Other councils in the country, they are struggling, bankrupted. They are asking emergency funds. They are asking from the help, and they're trying to get any source of investments. How we can balance this budget and how we can run this smoothly, and we have reserves as well. At least there will be a clarity for the residents who are listening online. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think this goes back to what I was talking about earlier about this ruthless financial efficiency that runs through the council. Every department is doing its utmost to make sure that all resources are used as effectively as possible, and the key outcome is delivering for residents in the most in the best way possible, making sure they get the best possible services. I know that lots of councils are really struggling to make ends meet. And look, I don't claim it was easy getting a balanced budget. Right? Although I only come up once a year to talk about this, you know, a budget is for life, not just for early February. You know, we do spend quite a long time pouring through line by line all of the council's expenditure and trying to find as many ways as possible just to try and make it as efficient as possible. Yeah, one of the things that we're going to be talking about this evening in terms of homeless prevention is something that is creating a huge amount of difficulty for a great many councils. I think I read a statistic that as a whole, councils in London spend £4 million a day on preventing homelessness. And that number, you know, only seems to be going up. There are huge challenges for local government. And for the past 15 years, there hasn't been any sort of joined up thinking from central government about how those should be solved. You know, we'll be interested to see any solutions that are put forward by the current government. There is a consultation at the moment, yeah, we'll certainly have things to say about that when the time comes. But for too long, this has just been a problem that's been sort of kicked into the long grass, and that's why we're seeing councils across London, but across the country as a whole, really struggling with some of these intractable problems.
Great work, great job. I think we can provide the consultancy to the other councils. Thanks.
Sukhvinder Khalsi.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add one supplementary comment to what Councillor Ree has said. So I could sit here and tell you how good the council is doing about its finances and how well it's governed and how careful we are with ruthless financial efficiency. But what's really more important is the external auditor's view. So the external auditor gives you as members and the residents, businesses, visitors to the borough some independent assurance that the finances of the council are well managed. He reported last November to the audit committee and gave the council some very glowing comments about how well it's managing its resources overall. It gives 3 ratings: a financial sustainability rating, which we've got amber on, a governance rating, which we've got a green on, and we've got a green as well on the value for money, which is the efficiency, effectiveness, economy bit. So that's really the measure that members, residents need to also be mindful of, that there is an independent scrutiny there and the finances are being checked for the council.
Thank you very much. Very pertinent point. May I ask, Daniel Richford, you are, I think, going to just talk us through the medium-term financial strategy. Is that right? Housing solutions.
I'm going to do that bit, which,
Okay.
so that bit of the presentation looks after the services that are funded from the general fund, which is what Councillor Ree has just talked about. I'll start and do the background to that one. And obviously, Councillor May, if there's anything you want to add, then please do that. So the kind of service that's covered in the general fund for the committee here is what's referred to as the Homeless Solution Service, providing accommodation for people who are homeless. Councillor Ree earlier has eloquently indicated the size of this issue in London. I think when I also looked at the numbers, there are 170,000 people that are estimated across London who are homeless. That's almost the size of the population of the borough here at LBHF, and the numbers that Councillor Ree has talked about in terms of the amount of spend that every day local authorities are having to do across London. 4 million a day, that's over £1 billion a year, which is being spent on that one. But really, the issue has arisen because of a number of historical issues, which is what I want to cover a little bit about in the presentation here, and then explain our detailed budget. So, Danny, if you just go on to the kind of context bit for a moment, then I'd be grateful to you. Next one, please. What I'm trying to do in this particular slide is to share with members of the committee exactly why we've got the kind of homelessness situation that we've got at the council here. We've got about 1,500 people who are being housed at any particular point in time, and there is an increasing demand for that. But that's really a combination of what's been happening over the past decade and a half or so. We've had a lack of available supply for new and social and affordable housing. That's been restricted overall. The government now has launched a program of new build across the nation, which will provide and increase the supply overall for affordable homes. Last week at council, you received a report that talked about the PRS sector and the policy that the council has developed. Councillor Umi spoke about that. You know the issues there very well. It's a deregulated sector. Property standards aren't clear. Our residents are concerned when they rent from private landlords. They could be subject to short notice evictions. We've seen a lot of those under Section 21. And then, of course, the cost of living crisis has resulted in spiralling rent across the piece. Danny later on will talk about how our council rents that residents pay are only about a quarter of what the market rents are overall across the council, but there have been contributions that have led to the kind of crisis that we see at the moment, and there are new policies, hopefully nationally, which will be developed in response to that. But that's also been overlain by some of the inflation and the economic issues, repossessions, unaffordable mortgages, pressure on household incomes, wages and unemployment. It's all led to a very complicated issue, which has resulted in the kind of crisis that we've seen in homelessness, the reduction in the rents overall from 16 to 20, and of course the local housing allowances overall. We are continuing to see an increase in the total number of approaches that we get across for residents. So that's a little bit of a graph that says to you, overall in 1920, we had about slightly under 2,000 people who approached the council on an annual basis seeking homeless new accommodation. And that's really gone up to over 3,000, 3,500 almost, 300 cases a month or so. And that's something that's being seen across all London boroughs who are seeing that pressure as well there. Just to say a little bit on the next slide about the budgets overall for the service, a couple of pie charts there, but I just want to highlight a couple of key things really. The total spend that the council invests in providing accommodation for homeless people is almost £45 million or so. So you can see in the first pie chart on the top right how much is used for temporary accommodation through landlords and all the other prevention activities and all the other costs, including our teams for that. And the bottom left pie chart, the orange and the amber one, gives you an indication of where the funding for that comes from. We get a substantial amount of resources from government overall, 11.6 million, and the rest is really through rents and the charges that we get from benefits as well associated with that. I just want to explain a little bit then on the next slide about how the overall resources for that service are changed year on year. So the net spend at the moment for the service is 13.4 million, and that's going to increase to 15.7. We're actually going to be investing almost 4.7 more additional in this service. Inflation allowances, extra growth that Councillor Rita referred to earlier. But we're really fortunate the council has been given an extra £2.7 million from the Homelessness Prevention Grant that Councillor Ree again talked about earlier from the 233 nationally. So all that has allowed us to increase the total investment in the service by 4.7. It's not quite enough that in terms of what we need, but we'll have to progress that overall during the year. So the net spend on the service will go up from 13.4 to 15.7. But the service, through Richard and the team, are doing a number of things. Sorry, that's just explaining the overall efficiencies and investment that we put in, which I talked about earlier. So Danny, I'm happy for you to go on to the action plan if there is anything on that one. Yeah, just to say a little bit about what the council is doing, Richard and the team, to try to alleviate the issues overall for our people in temporary accommodation. So we are trying to look very much about exactly where the presentations are being done, make sure we carefully evaluate those and go through those overall. We are looking at moving our most expensive cases, top 200, into lower cost accommodation wherever we can. So we're working with our landlords very proactively to secure that wherever we can. And then we're looking at other options for our residents eventually, including some direct awards into our stock, nominations right to registered providers, and then of course the private sector options if they are workable. So we're doing all those things to try to manage the overall position on the housing solution service overall. Chair, that's all I was going to say on that. So I've given a bit of a context about why we've got the issue there, the kind of numbers across London, a little bit about the extra investment that the council is putting in the service to protect those vulnerable people, and we'll carry on to work with our residents with that. And then finally, a little bit about what we're trying to do to manage the overall position for the service overall. Additional details are in the report. The slides just cover that wider context overall. But I'm happy to pause and defer to Councillor Ume, Councillor Reef, if they want to add anything supplementary to that.
Thank you, Sukhvinder. Thank you, committee. I think you've covered all the points that this council is facing when it comes to dealing with the homelessness crisis. I mean, like many other local authorities, the challenges that you've highlighted with regards to supply of affordable housing. This council is committed to building new, affordable, energy-efficient homes, and we've committed to building more than 3,000 over the next few years. But notwithstanding the challenges also that you've highlighted within the private rented sector of finding that supply in that sector, but also finding affordable supply there. I believe the London councils commented in the last financial year, 2023 to 2024, there was a funding gap of nearly £100 million in terms of the local housing allowance for councils to be able to provide housing within the PRS sector. And so, yeah, there is an incredible cost to many local authorities, including our own, in terms of being able to afford to house people within the PRS sector, thanks to the LHA pay freeze or freeze in 2011. So, yeah, there are a number of different challenges that have been highlighted. We're doing everything we can to, as I mentioned, increase supply. We welcome the government's grant of 2.7 million to help us tackle homelessness, and doing all that we can within the team to manage the cases that are brought to our door as efficiently as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Ume. Can I just welcome the additional, I think we talked about 1.2 million for homelessness, which is in addition to 3.5 million from the Homelessness Prevention Grant that you just spoke about, Sukhvinder, and inflationary uplifts. Can I ask, particularly to you, Councillor Ume, are there areas that are really earmarked for this spending? Are there areas that we know will be benefiting immediately from the uplift? So the additional 1.2 million for homelessness, I guess.
So that is dedicated spending that will cover all the work that we're doing within the homelessness team. So that's either finding homes for people within the PRS sector, so helping to provide housing, so paying for the rent within that sector. In addition to that, it's obviously providing people to help provide support within that service. So looking at the support we can run within the team. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Richard?
Thank you, Councillor Zuma and Councillor Daly. I'm Richard Schwade, Director of Housing. One of the key areas which we are looking at, which has been successful over the past year, is about prevention. So we are putting a lot of our effort into that prevention area work. What that means is that one of the stipulates of the new grant regime from the government is prevention activities. So stopping people coming from the front door and helping them into the private sector rent market, or for instance, looking at other opportunities about looking at temporary accommodation. And the final thing, what we've actually undertaken compared to some other London authorities, is that we've also been able to reduce our families in bed and breakfast. That is one of the key elements compared to other local authorities we have actually been undertaken. And that means that it allows us to make sure that we care and support our families, and making sure that the families focus their needs and their attentions to make sure that we give extra support for them so that they can actually have a normal family life, if that makes sense, Councillor Daly.
It does, thank you, Richard. And it's all part of preventing the homelessness in the first place, so that we stop that escalation of demand when people fall into crisis. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Members, any questions? Councillor Sadiq.
Thank you, Chair. Again, amazing. Due to the new legislation coming up soon for the housing sector, there may be the landlords' attitude will change toward the renting, and especially for the housings and evictions. And in the same time, maybe the homelessness will increase as we predicted it could be due to the new legislation. In the same time, as we have a extra 1.2 million at the moment, and to tackle this, do you think the daycare centers, if we have a more in the borough, at the moment probably we have altogether 5 daycare centers, and including 1 vulnerable, and so it will help for the homelessness to tackle that as a cheaper day centers where they can have less cost and more facilities, and to tackle the homelessness? Or what do you think about this?
Thank you. One of the things which we're looking at is working with London councils. So one of the things which we've been lobbying London councils is this additional support and funding stream. Hence why we've been able to get the extra money from government to help us with this area work. I think going forwards, it's about looking at prevention measures, about how we can actually do things. The work streams, what you're talking about, is about adult social care counsellors. So we are working a lot more closely with adult social care about what we can actually do. And if the other aspect, I'm wanting to see is how we can actually help with our voluntary sector. So going forward, if you recall at the last PAC meeting, we had a number of colleagues from the voluntary sector here talking about some of the day activity programs they've been undertaking. So there's areas of work from there, and there's also funding maybe through 3SIFT funding, where we can actually get them to do activities linking up about housing homelessness prevention.
Councillor Alford, would you have?
I do appreciate, and I would make it clear how much hard work the homeless team do. I think there's sometimes a gap that happens. I've just had to deal, I'm not going to go into casework, but let's say I've been dealing with somebody quite recently. They're passed from one department because they're then declared homeless, and then they seem to get rather lost in the sort of abyss and get very panicked because they don't know that the council is actually ticking all the boxes to move them on to the next stage And I have raised this with the director, that people rather go into an abyss, that they're waiting, they think they're all right, and then they don't know where they're going a day before, whether they're being given temporary accommodation. And then what they're not explained to them is how much the council's going to help them with the temporary accommodation. And when they look at it, they think, well, I can't afford it, what do I do? And I've just had a case like that with somebody distraught because they're saying, I've got to move. Well, they had to move today. So that's one point I'd make. Sometimes I think you're still siloing, that you're not walking at a broad brush. And the other thing is, how far out are you looking at accommodation for? I know, because we do have a wide range. I know the affordability and I know the difficulties, so I'm not going into the fact of that. I'm just wondering what the area is. Is it pan-London or is it just certain boroughs we mainly work in?
Thank you for the comments. So just to come back to you on the first, I suppose, reflection with regards to, I suppose, managing expectations, more effective communications with officers and residents who are looking for a more permanent solution when it comes to housing. There is more that can be done in this space. I think there is that dedication and commitment from the team to do that, and that ranges from creating a detailed housing plan with clear pathway into permanent housing. So it's clear about what the timeframes are, what some of the options are, and in addition to that, what that will look like at the various points in the journey. Because from what I was hearing from your comment, this is about individuals understanding where they stand in the process, but then also from what you're saying individuals need to understand where they're sitting in that process. So when they present as homeless, what happens at each stage, what the timings are, and that could be better managed and handled within the team, and that consistency can be applied. But there is that commitment through developing those housing plans with clear timings, clear options, to make sure that's managed more effectively. Certainly we'll take that feedback on board. And then in addition to that, and I'm sure Richard, you may well want to come in and comment on that, but in addition to that, I mean, our commitment is to make sure that we can find housing for individuals who find themselves in challenging circumstances because they're facing homelessness, because they may have been served a Section 21 eviction notice and it's sort of a last minute scenario, or they've been kicked out by their landlord for whatever reason. So our utmost imperative is providing stable temporary accommodation for them as quickly as we possibly can. And in doing that, ensuring that's as close as possible to their community, friends, family. There may be instances where individuals may be fleeing from domestic violence, which actually may prevent them from staying locally within the local neighbourhoods, within the borough, in fact. And so, again, our primary concern is making sure that we find them that safe housing and it's a temporary, secure solution for them. So wherever we can ensure that they stay as close as possible to familiar surroundings and schools, etc., and so forth, we will. Richard, do you want to add anything?
Sure. Thank you, Councillor May. One of the other things what we are looking at is making sure that we look at transport hubs to make sure that people can get through and get to the places correctly. We're not a local authority like other local authorities in London to put people up in the northeast of England. And actually up in the northeast of England, there are some local authorities who are actually challenging those London authorities that they need to inform and tell people about the situation. Councillor Alford.
No, and I know that, and I have spoken to Mr. Shway on occasions about this. I think that we perhaps need to rethink the communication, because certainly this resident was completely in the dark the whole time. And I think perhaps we should, if you could take my reflections on board about giving them the pathway, because they didn't know what the pathway was.
We'll certainly take those reflections on board. I mean, I recognise it's a very challenging time for individuals, and so perhaps that added level of additional talking through will help, because it's a very challenging situation for individuals who face homelessness. So yeah, we'll take those reflections on board.
Thank you, Councillor Alford. Councillor May. I think we've also discussed here before how some of the communication has to be, it's legislated, and some of it is really difficultly written, and the explanations around it are so very important in these situations.
I think it's even more, and I'm not to go into a length now because I think Councillor Rome's taken on board. I think it's the basicness of saying, good morning, this is the situation you are today, this is what our plan is for tomorrow, and that will be what it is on Monday. And that's just simple human communication, which when you're very upset is a lot simpler if somebody says, today it's this, tomorrow it's that, next day. Just as simple as that.
Lovely, thank you very much. Danny, do we have the housing solutions presentation to go through next? Oh, we don't.
We have
Sikvinder,
the
sorry.
housing revenue account presentation to go through next.
Okay. Hang on a second. Okay, sorry, my apology. We are done with the medium-term forecast and are moving on. So before we do move on, I think, committee, we should consider if there are any sort of proposals or recommendations we'd like to make to Cabinet regarding this matter. I would suggest that we would like to recommend that Cabinet approves the budget as presented here. Do members agree?
Agreed.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Danny, huge apologies. Would you like to take us through the housing revenue account budget for 24-25, please?
Thank you, Councillor Daly. Good evening, everybody. I'm Danny Rochford, and I'm the Head of Finance responsible for the housing revenue account, and I'm here to present the latest update on the 10-year business plan and proposals for the HRA budget and rent and service charge changes from April this year. Just a bit about the contents. I'm going to take us through the current financial and strategic operating environment for the Council's housing service. There'll be an overview of the revised HRA 10-year business plan, a look at the HRA budget proposed for the next financial year, including proposed changes to tenants' rents and service charges, a brief insight into the capital programme of improvements that the Council's making to tenants' homes, and also provide some information on key financial indicators for the housing operation. The current strategic service and financial operating environment remains, as it has done recently, extremely challenging. The housing sector is perhaps more impacted by recent global and national events than other areas, and there are competing pressures on council housing finances at this time. There are increasing demands for social and affordable housing. There's an ongoing and immediate need to address long-term underinvestment in the housing stock. The regulator, quite rightly, requires improvements in building safety. Richard, Sukhvinder and their teams are working extremely hard to improve resident engagement and housing services. At the same time, we're decarbonising our council homes, and we're continually improving the performance of the repairs service. On the finance side, the ongoing national economic climate remains heavily impacted by the legacy of recent high inflation. And of course, we've got continuing high interest rates, which increase the cost of service delivery, pressure on rent collection as household incomes are squeezed. Our capital investment plans are more expensive, and it increases the demand for housing services overall. And on top of that, the vast majority of our rents in Hammersmith and Fulham for council homes are below the target rent. In fact, 90% of them are lower than the level that government would expect them to be. However, government has provided some certainty as it has set out social housing rent policy for the next 5 years. And that means that annual rent increases in social housing will be limited to the September CPI plus 1%. CPI is consumer price inflation. So, In the face of all these challenges, our financial strategy has 4 key outcomes. One is to ensure that our tenants get high quality housing services. Also, delivering key housing priorities, including improving the condition of our tenants and residents' homes, as well as developing new homes. The need to deliver exceptional performance of the housing service, and making certain, of course, that the HRA continues to be well managed financially so we can provide our tenants with the services they deserve. 10-year business plan is a key document that ensures the long-term financial sustainability of the HRA. Some of the key outcomes from the modelling we've undertaken include an increase in the number of council homes to 12,700, including 831 new homes, in addition to leasehold properties of around 4,900. There's an estimated spend of nearly £1.1 billion on residents' homes over the next 10 years within our plan. And we aim to maintain a minimum of £5 million in our reserves to protect the HRA from any unexpected events. We also have a plan to make significant savings next year and a further 1.7 million the year after. A couple of key ratios at the bottom of the slide to give assurance really that the long-term plans we have are sustainable. There's a need to spend heavily on day-to-day repairs at present, but as we undertake more investment in residents' homes over time, the ratio of repairs spend to rent income will reduce. So in other words, for every £100 of rent that council tenants pay, £40 is currently spent on repairs. The plan indicates that this will reduce to a lower number in time. And the increase in borrowing to pay for the improvements in tenants' homes, that's planned to amount to no more than 55% of the value of the housing stock, which indicates that the finances are being managed sustainably within the housing revenue account. The budget requires us to make a number of assumptions about key cost drivers, and that includes providing for pay inflation of 2% on the assumption that inflation remains in line with the Bank of England's 2% target overall. We have a range of housing management and repairs contracts, many of which require us to increase contract payments in line with CPI. We're currently losing a small amount of rental income due to void properties at a rate of 2%, but following the implementation of a voids reduction plan last year, the void rates come down from above 3%, making sure that more of our council homes are let at any one time. And the plan is to continue lowering those voids to around 1.6% of the stock next year. At 87%, that's a more than adequate provision for cumulative rent arrears within the HRA. 6 million of the 6.9 million of total rent arrears are wholly provided for. We've had to increase our assumptions about the cost of borrowing next year from an interest rate of around 2.5%, which we previously had in the plan, to now between 4 and 5% to reflect current expectations on the Bank of England timeline for decisions and current rates that are available from the Public Works Loan Board. Of course, that need to increase borrowing to finance the Housing Capital Programme doesn't come without a cost, and that's meant that we have implemented an efficiency programme to enable us to deliver a balanced budget in the HRA, and that will deliver 5.3 million of savings next year. The rent increase. So as I said earlier, on rents, government's announced a 5-year rent settlement that will see increases of up to consumer price inflation plus 1% permitted. So in line with this, the council is proposing to implement that national rent policy with an increase of 2.7% from April. And that's based on the September 2024 Consumer Prices Index of 1.7% plus 1%. And that's in line with government policy. Based on the current average weekly rent of £135 per week, that increase will be equivalent on average to about £3.65 per week. As an example, if a tenant is currently paying £100 in rent from this April, the weekly rent will change to £102.70. We're proposing to reduce tenant service charges on average by £1.32 per week. I do need to explain this though. Most service charges, such as grounds maintenance and caretaking, are increasing, as you might expect, but reductions in the cost of energy has meant that we've been able to reduce our communal lighting charge, and for many homes, this charge has reduced by more than the other charges have increased. So although most tenants will get a reduction in their tenant service charges overall, many will also see increases. And that's because the changes in tenant service charges depends on the combination of services that each tenant receives at their home. So for example, if a tenant doesn't receive communal lighting, but does receive, say, caretaking and grounds maintenance, then that tenant's service charges would increase overall. It's just that around 10,500 of our tenants receive communal lighting. Hence, many of our tenants are getting a reduction overall. Also on heating and hot water charges, I'm pleased to be able to confirm that there'll be an average reduction of just under £2 a week for the personal heating charge and 45 pence for the communal service. Again, that's an average reduction. It's not necessarily the reduction that will be applied to a particular individual's home. It's the average. Personal heating is not eligible for housing benefit, so that will be money back in tenants' pockets. I'd now like to give you a bit more information on the key outcomes of the budget for next year. So we're going to set a balanced budget with no structural deficit. So the income will be matching the expenditure, and we're not going to be relying on our reserves to balance our finances. This will enable the HRA General Reserve of 5.4 million to be maintained. And we have included a contingency budget within our housing revenue account to help us to deal with any emerging and existing unbudgeted pressures. That's part of good, prudent financial management. The rent increase will generate an additional 2.3 million in income. And in setting the proposed rent, we've considered the need to get the balance right between affordability for our tenants and the need to generate income to manage, maintain and improve our tenants' homes. As Savinda mentioned earlier, the rent increase will still mean that council homes rents are on average only about 23% of private housing market rents in the borough. The changes that we're making in service charges will ensure that the costs of providing communal services such as caretaking and grounds maintenance are fully recovered. And that reduction that we've witnessed in energy procurement costs has enabled a reduction in service charges for many of our tenants. Included within the budget are efficiencies of 5.3 million, which are enabling continued investment and improvements to our tenants' homes. And the financial plan includes repairs and investment of £850 million over the next 10 years. Of course, there are, as always, a number of key risks going into next year. The pressures that we have really are all existing issues that we're experiencing right now, but plans are being developed and implemented to manage these within smaller budget envelopes going forward. The government's protection for public services over the national insurance increase may not be extended to the HRA. However, discussions are currently taking place among London local authorities, so that might change. But at present, we're expecting this to be an additional cost in the HRA budget. The Transition to universal credit continues and is expected to be completed shortly, but the more tenants we have on universal credit rather than on a housing benefit, the higher the risk of non-collection. From a regulatory and legislative perspective, we've got new housing regulations. We have increased interest from the Housing Ombudsman. We have new building and fire safety regulations, and the financial impact of all of that together will increase costs. Interest rates are not expected to fall quickly, so for the next 2 years of borrowing, loans from the Public Works Loan Board will be around 5%, even with the discount that the HRA has. We expect that the interest rate will fall to 4% before dropping to a longer term business planning assumption in the later years of the plan of around 3.5%. Okay, just a slide on the general reserve in the HRA. As I said earlier, we've got 5.4 million in the general reserve. As we've now balanced the budget for 2 years in a row, that's from 24-25 onwards, where our income equals our expenditure, there's no need for us in the future to rely on reserves. And that's going to enable the council to sustain the level of reserves at the £5 million level whilst delivering improvements in the service. This slide sets out the housing capital investment plans. It includes not just the asset management and compliance programme, which relates to improvements to our residents' homes, which will cost us about £268 million over the next 4 years. But it also brings in the net zero plans to decarbonise homes, as well as the new build development programme. Next year, that will be 136 million overall. One of the key impacts, though, is the borrowing figure at the bottom of the table. We're planning to borrow £100 million this year and another £100 million next year. That borrowing, as I said earlier, has become more expensive. But the overall level of borrowing that we have in the HRA has been modelled in that 10-year plan, and it is sustainable. Couple more slides. A couple of key metrics here that give a bit of context and perhaps a bit of comfort to the financial challenges that we are facing. Tenants' homes account for one of the biggest numbers in the council's balance sheet. They're valued at around 1.4 billion under the lower social housing valuation, whereas the current level of external borrowing that we're going to undertake in the HRA will increase to £450 million by the end of the year. We're taking those two figures. That means that the average borrowing of just under £40,000 per home is actually much less than the £120,000 average value of our tenants' homes. And that's much less than the level of debt per property, which is common among registered housing providers. Basically, that means that there is room for the additional borrowing that we've included in our plans and that it is sustainable. Following this meeting and the Sheltered Housing Forum and the Housing Representatives Forums that we've had in the last couple of weeks, any feedback from tenants and residents and stakeholders from these meetings and from this PAC will be taken into account, and afterwards the report will be taken for Cabinet approval on the 10th of February. That concludes my presentation. Happy to hand back to the Chair.
Thank you very much, Danny. That's a great presentation. And I think that members will welcome a balanced budget presented today. May I ask a question straight off. You were talking during your presentation of efficiencies of 5.3 million. Do you have any more information around those efficiencies?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. The savings plan comes essentially in two parts. One element of it is that just over £2 million of that reduction in our costs will come from the fact that we've been able to reduce the contingency budget that we hold in the HRA. In recent years, we've increased and held a very significant amount of contingency in the budgets in order to protect the HRA from the various pressures that we've been experiencing. But we are now at a point with a balance of income and expenditure in the HRA where we're able to make some reductions in that. The other element of the savings will come from services. For example, we are just approaching the conclusion of the integrated housing management improvement program, and as a consequence of that, we no longer need to incur spend on the development and the implementation of the projects. We're now able to return that to a business as usual position, which means that we no longer need to hold those extra budgets.
Thank you very much. Members, Councillor Sadiq.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks for the good presentations. Can I ask you, Daniel, can you explain a little bit more the voids? I know it's a robust target for you for the next financial year. Can you explain a little bit what is the robust target is? How are you going to decrease 1.6 voids, which is possible? And then for the clarity purpose.
Councillor Sadiq, sorry, if you mind, could I interject, because that's more of an operational matter, if that's okay, Chair.
Oh, please do, Richard. Thank you.
So one of the things which we realise going forwards, and it's a bit like what Danny's mentioned, is that, and all of you alluded to, you've been very kind to me tonight, is about a better joined-up thinking process and operation. And one of the things what we've done with the voids is have a bit more joined-up thinking. So what you were having is that you had 4 different officers always handing different keys all over the place, which was bonkers, isn't it? So what that meant was that the void process was a lot longer than what it should be. So what we've now been able to do is actually we've been able to reduce it a lot less. Previously, voids were in the region of probably coming up to like a couple of months or several months, in some places even a couple of years. We now reduced it down to roughly between 20 to 30 odd days. And what the team are doing is making sure each officer has got that responsibility to actually make sure that that void's undertaken. We're now looking at the process on how we can actually improve that through IT as well, to make sure that we have people do signatories actually when they come and have a look at the property. And the other aspect, what we're undertaking, is that when those properties come back onto the market, we're making sure that tenants make sure that they hand over the property of a good condition. If not, we will be then going back to those tenants and saying that that's not good enough and you need to improve on it before we actually agree, or we will fine them because they've left the property in such a bad repair, which means that we've then got to spend more money to get it better. So hopefully that explains what we're actually doing. We are wanting our voids in the region about less than 100. That's what you normally get, should be on a monthly basis. So that's the focus on the service. And I remember when I first came to see you over 2 years ago, it's 2 years anniversary next month, that our void situation was 600 plus. So we've gone from 600 plus down to less than 100, and we're going to focus in on making sure that's our KPI going forwards. That work streams will ensure that, more importantly, we'll get our voids back for residents, but also we'll also show value for our money and also value for our residents, because we're actually turning those voids around a lot more quicker and give them back to residents who need them from parts of for the council. Hopefully that explains the situation.
Thank you very much for the clarity. This is very good achievement, going from 600 to 100. Thanks for the great work. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Alford.
Thank you for that report. I would have liked a little bit more detail on certain things. Now, one of the problems with the HRA account has been the level of compensation that has had to be paid to residents and also to the ambulance chasers. And I wondered how much that was now impacting on the HRA account and what contingencies you'd allowed for that and what the update was.
So, Councillor, we've done quite a lot of work on that. One of the things is actually improving our policies and procedures, which has been cleared by Councillor Ume just last month. So we're now undertaking a situation where we will pay the right level of compensation, where previously we were on the back foot quite a bit. We're now in a better position of saying what needs to happen and when that assurance are. We're also doing a lot more work on disrepair. We're saying to residents, don't go to those ambulance chasing companies. I'll say up the north, because I'm from the north, I can say that. And actually, we can actually work with them to make sure that we can actually do the jobs for them. Because putting our residents in those ambulance chasing solicitor firms doesn't really help them, because actually we can do a lot of things better. So we are actually actively going to speak to residents and say, we can help and support you and get your properties, and actually it's our properties, aren't they, into a good situation. So that's what we're doing, Councillor Alford.
Do you have a figure for what it's going to cost the HRA this year, or projected figure?
Well, we've got a figure, let's say, for instance, for compensation. It depends on the compensations, but roughly compensations working, we've got, so compensation policies are saying about £250 if there is a particular lateness of those matters.
When you're doing your figures on the budget, you're projecting what the budget's going to be, the HRA, you know.
What Danny and I can do is give you a written response after this meeting.
Thank you very much. Yes, that would be very helpful.
Chair, if I may just add, I think ultimately what we want to see is we want to ensure that properties are repaired. We want to ensure that residents are living in safe and decent homes here, right? And just to Richard's point with regards to these organisations or these solicitors, these firms who are quite frankly putting our residents at risk here by, you know, intervening and in falsely believing they're there to help, when actually it does delay the work. It has an impact ultimately on the families. It has an impact on, yes, the rising costs. So, I mean, we're completely committed to ensuring that we're taking these interventions. We have processes in place, as Richard mentioned, new policies, new procedures, so residents can come to the council with any issues with their properties and work to resolve them. And there's obviously wider tighter legislation that's in place with regards to this as well, and advice that comes from the Ombudsman, etc. and so forth. But I think ultimately this is about ensuring that we are maintaining homes to a decent standard, but residents are coming to us so that we're not having to pay out the money to the third parties who take a significant sum and leave residents, quite frankly, out of pocket, you know, compared to what perhaps they were expecting, which is quite heartbreaking to see.
should have thought it would have been quite clear my views on ambulance chasing lawyers that I am not in any way promoting them. But what I'm trying to get at is we've still got some of their claims still in, and we have claims from other residents because of disrepair. And I'm wondering on that impact on the budget. And I think that's a fair question.
Yeah, understood. And we're working hard to work through those and to make sure that we're addressing them over the course of the next financial year as well. So yeah, but thank you for the comments.
May I ask a related question, perhaps to Richard? When Danny was presenting there, he was talking about the repair spend being set to reduce. And I wondered if you could give us a bit of more information about why it will come down.
I think, Chair, what we've been doing is, you know, we've been getting a service in a good position in repairs. We haven't took a lot of, we've been able to now get in a situation where the repair service is working very well. And with that, we will be able to actually improve. We won't need as much money as what we've had previously. The other aspect, what we're also looking at, is also improving on our asset management plan over the next 10 years. And part of the asset management plan will also help us to actually earmark where funding should be for capital repairs, PPM. And what I mean by PPM is the works what we're doing, bathrooms and kitchens, so that we've got understanding of where we need to do our work streams over the next 10-year period. So hopefully that answers your question, Chair.
Thank you very much. It does. Right. Committee members, no more comments or questions. In which case, I would very much like to invite Mr. Thurloway, who has written in to us.
Strategic leadership team. Our strategic leadership team as a is the most senior group of council officers and is composed of colleagues
There's
leading
a
the main service
mute
areas.
button at the top there.
It is made up of Sharon Lee, Chief Executive, Brown King, Executive Director of Place, Jackie McShannon, Executive Director of People, Grant Day, Director of People.
That's what I decided to do. I told you it was a rubbish computer.
I think that was just it's assistance. It's gone into a lead box now, and Debbie's jumping up and down on it. It's going to be fine.
I told you, we said it was rubbish.
Mrs. Thurloway, do you know where the microphone button is there? Okay, lovely. May I ask you to just read your question? Thank you. Thank you. I'm not sure that microphone was working at the time, Mr. Thurloway. Would you mind if I just repeated it, or can we get a working? That's better. That's better. I'm sorry. Could I ask you to say it again?
Yeah.
Thank you.
The HRA capital programme shows several projects that include market sale for some dwellings. This was intended at the time to be leasehold. It now appears that common hold will be enacted at some time before the projects are completed. Will the council be prepared to have preparations to make those projects common hold rather than leasehold?
Thank you very much. Richard.
Chair, thank you for that, and thank you for your question to us. I'm going to respond on behalf of the Housing Service, sir. So we understand that the government will publish a draft bill later this year to reform the leasehold and common hold regulations, which may include abolishing the leasehold tenure for all new flats. We look forward to understanding and implementing any new regulations that will better serve our communities. And many of our developments on council estates include mixed tenure to meet different housing needs. And we will explore new ownership models that help us to deliver safe, secure, affordable homes for all our residents in Hammersmith and Fulham.
Mr. Thurloway, would you like to ask something as follow-up?
Yes, we sort of know what's going to be in the legislation because they're in the Law Commission's report of 2020, which has been kicking around in the previous government for that length of time. And I also think that it's the White City estate is imminently will this year be ready for market sale of some units. And I would think, are they going to be common hold? I know the housing minister has said that he's going to publish a white paper soon, but he's also said we will consult next year on the best approach to banning new leasehold flats. So we can see the direction of travel here, and it's cross-party. There's an all-party parliamentary group that's in agreement with this, which was chaired by Peter Bottomley, the Tory, and also includes Andy Slaughter in that group.
As local government officers, you can appreciate I can't actually say what will happen.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is that any new legislation we will look at and see how we can actually do and support our residents going forwards. So I've got to wait and see what we've got before it actually happens, if that makes sense, sir. And that will allow us to do what was said. So, you know, as I said, we will continue to understand what the situation is. We will monitor it. We'll work with our colleagues in legal. We will work with our colleagues in regeneration and understand what needs to happen and ensure that we support all our residents going forwards.
But you are aware of the Law Commission's report that's published.
As I said, I'm aware of everything, but we've got to wait until what happens in law.
Mr. Thurloway, thank you very much. Thank you for coming along this evening and asking the question. Really interesting. I think it's an area for the committee to consider in future, the kind of leasehold, common hold question. Okay. Can I ask, do committee members agree to note the presentation this evening?
Chair, may I just add something at this point?
Please do,
Sure.
Councillor Ume, yes.
Well, it was just a follow on from Danny's presentation where he was talking about the consultation with regards to the housing revenue account and discussion at Sheltered Housing Forum and the Housing Representatives Forum. And some of the feedback from members there, they were very grateful for the report and the update from Danny, very grateful to officers for the work that had been done to manage in very challenging circumstances, manage the HRA budget, and they had also wanted to pass on some feedback, which will be passed on to Cabinet with regards to giving thanks and being pleased to see those figures, particularly as they related to the service charges and rent. So I just wanted to pass on that feedback that representatives had asked for that to be passed along to this space and the Cabinet space as well.
Thank you very much for sharing that. So that's the end of our main agenda. The date of the next meeting, members, is the 23rd of April. I've been speaking to officers about bringing a piece in around compliance. I'm particularly interested in and we've spoken about it before, some of the findings from the Grenfell inquiry, some of those recommendations and some of those criticisms that were made of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. And I'm particularly interested in an area of compliance that would look at Hammersmith and Fulham under the same kind of light, under the same kind of microscope, and ask some of those questions. So I'm asking for a report to come in on compliance. I think we're also talking about a piece on hidden homelessness, which in the last couple of meetings where we've covered kind of street homelessness and temporary accommodation, we haven't really talked about that hidden homelessness as part of that. So we're very keen to bring that back in. I think also on the forward plan, we want to look at something around sheltered housing. Very much appreciate, I think I can speak on behalf of all members here, to bring repairs back in at a point in the not too distant future, possibly July, to bring the repairs update in. And then another area around the capital programming and regeneration, maybe a substantive piece in the autumn. Are members happy with that forward plan as it stands? That's lovely, thank you very much. Okay, so then all that's left is for me to thank everybody who attended this evening. Thank you everybody who presented and spoke this evening. Thank you to residents for bringing questions, very much appreciated. And to everybody watching at home tonight's meeting, thank you for joining us and good night.